The other night I caught a Stalker 2 ad before my nightly Skibidi toilet binge. As the soft serenades of Skibidi tried to lull me into a restful slumber, I was wide awake thinking about Stalker. I couldn't stop thinking about how I've never really played any of these games. Despite the theme and gameplay being the type of thing I'm into, I'm always down for a kooky game made by some Eastern Europeans, especially one where I need to survive a wasteland with nothing but a trusty wood and steel lead chucker. Hold on, why are we looking at PUBG footage? We are talking about Stalker. Nope, that's still wrong. That is Escape from Tarkov footage. That is Chernobylite footage. That is Waterworld on the NES. That's not even fucking close. Look, I get it. In current year, the idea isn't exactly original, but something about these trailers put my attention on this series. I mean, look at this. It almost makes it seem like the Ukraine's a real place. That night I had a dream where I beat the Stalker trilogy, telling you which, if any, are still worth your time and money, and all of this happened before Stalker 2 comes out in November. What could go wrong? It definitely won't get delayed again. That never happens in this series. To understand why this is like this, I think it makes sense to figure out who made this. The Stalker franchise was created by Ukrainian developers GSC Game World and published by THQ here in Burgerland. Despite GSC being known as the Stalker guys now, they were a very different studio before Stalker. GSC Game World was founded in 1995 and spent most of their early years creating real-time strategy games, typically based around monumental historical events like Oliver Stone's epic film Alexander. And for our interests, there's one game that stood out from their RTS onslaught, the 2001 release codename Outbreak, a first-person shooter game that shares a few similarities with Stalker: large open levels, sci-fi storytelling, and deciding what guns and armor to use. In some ways, it's a forefather to the Stalker franchise, but then why did it take them so long to iterate on the ideas of codename Outbreak? It's because the developers were fresh to this style of game. They were a young dev studio and fell into traps that many young teams make. GSC Game World had a habit of overpromising and bloating the scope of their Stalker project, which created development problems as early as its initial public announcement. The first time the world saw Stalker would be way back in 2001, where it debuted as Stalker Oblivion Lost. The marketing promoted Stalker as the ultimate game, with a million little features that were unlikely to be feasible for a small studio like GSC. On its reveal, the studio was promising a 2003 release date, and well, much like the moon landing, that release date never happened. 2003 came and almost went without any Stalker for fans to play, until December of 2003 when disaster struck the project in the form of an internal beta leaking online. Known as Build 1096, this internal build acted as a tech demo for fans that had been eagerly awaiting Stalker. They were able to play around in the custom-built X engine and see all the high-tech bells and whistles it was capable of. It wasn't a finished game, but it showed that Stalker was far from vaporware. Some fans loved it, while others were far less impressed. Some fans felt that they'd been waiting for too long and the build was too far from being a finished game. Some of them felt lied to about what the game was or what the small Ukrainian team could accomplish. Luckily, this feeling of waiting for too long and questioning the team's abilities to deliver on their promises would never ever happen again in the Stalker fanbase. Unluckily, THQ was also sick of waiting in the promises. This build leaking was the fuck up that forced THQ to have a more hands-on approach with GSC. To do this, THQ needed a man on the inside, and Dean Sharp was that man. He was sent to the GSC headquarters in Kiev with one mission: get the game out the fucking door. He went to Kiev and did what every video essayist is too chicken shit to do: cut a bunch of shit out. Sleeping mechanic causes bugs? Get rid of it. These monsters aren't done? Save them for a sequel. You need time to finish additional levels? How about I finish your fucking employment, pal? People are still split on if this approach was the right one, but I think we'd still be waiting for Stalker if it didn't happen. Sometimes really creative people need an editor. Have you read like a third of Stephen King's books? I mean, my lord. With his intervention, the game was able to slim its scope and get out the door. And as someone who has now played the game, it doesn't feel like some half-finished project. There's bugs that probably would have been caught with more QA time, and some features do feel a little half-baked, but hell, that's worth 70 buckaroos in today's market. Stalker is a hard game to put into a box, which is why most copies have been sold on Steam. If I had to define Stalker in a short sentence, it would be this. Stalker is an open zone, post-apocalyptic first-person shooter story-based game with light survival, RPG, and milsim elements. I don't know why they didn't just slap that on the box. Stalker is a weird amalgamation of elements that weren't awfully unique at the time and certainly aren't unique now. The uniqueness of Stalker comes from the way that it combines those elements to create something that still isn't quite like anything I've ever played. The big open levels remind me of games that probably took influence from Stalker, like DayZ or even the 3D Fallout games. The random horror elements remind me of the first Far Cry a little bit. For both games, I went in expecting to fight humans only, so the first time I saw a monster, I was shocked like a wrongly accused inmate. Both even used invisible enemy monsters that scared the shit out of me. Remember when Far Cry was an interesting series? Nacho remembers. The quest system reminds me of Radiant questing from Bethesda games. That might sound like an insult, but it isn't meant to be one. A lot of the side quests are go here and kill X quests with underwhelming rewards, but they're fun because the combat of Stalker is fun. The combat is somewhat similar to milsim games. Guns use a full ballistic system, so there's no hit scanning. Fully automatic fire is highly discouraged with shots going everywhere, and bullets are highly damaging. This combat system makes long-range engagements the most interesting encounters in the game. These engagements allow the game to flex its ballistic system in a way that's a little more interesting than ricocheting bullets off the ground like a Soviet rock skipping competition. Fighting the open zone sees you scrambling between bits of cover, trying to locate where shots are coming from, and returning fire without getting hit. The firefights in Stalker are extremely tense do-or-die situations with enemies that have absolutely no chill. Their AI makes them feel more like real people and less like robots. These guys are generally threat averse. They like cover just as much as you do, they like to pick you off from a distance, they like to flank you behind and catch you off guard, and most annoyingly, they like to camp like a little bitch. It's probably not the most advanced AI system in the world, but these guys are extremely dangerous and continuously fun to fight against. There were moments where it felt more like a fight in a multiplayer game than a single player one, which is extremely high praise for any single player shooter. I would say the enemy stalkers are the stars of the show. You'll face mutants and monsters in the game too, but those encounters are more interesting due to the fear they create, not the tactics that the monsters actually use. It doesn't help that generally speaking, the most mutant heavy levels are inside, and I think the inside levels are the weakest parts of Stalker. The ballistic system does not shine in close quarters combat, and it strips away the tactical depth that the large maps provide. Many of these areas are rich in atmosphere but lacking in gameplay experimentation. Unlike outdoors where you have a tactical sandbox, inside is like putting your meat directly in the sandbox. Large open areas against other stalkers are the best part of the game because it feels like a fair challenge with equal firepower. If the monsters, radiation, or anomalies don't put you down for a dirt nap, an enemy stalker's well-placed freedom rock certainly will. The guns in this game are extremely lethal. On the highest difficulties, only 1 or 2 bullets is enough to kill you. This lethality goes both ways, with enemies also having thinner skin than one of the richest people on the planet. Headshots are as catastrophic as a Dallas stroll with the top down, and body shots will generally make quick work of you and your enemies. At least until late game, where advanced armor makes dome shots a borderline requirement. Like real life, every gun in Stalker is a unique weapon with its own strengths and weaknesses. With a few of the guns having so many weaknesses, I wonder if Jesus regrets creating firearms for us to enjoy. The way Stalker works is as you keep progressing in the game, you'll find better and better gear, similar to other RPGs. This is great once you hit mid to late game and pretty much all the guns are different flavors of fantastic, but it makes the early game a bit shit. Using the first AK breaker barrel shotgun and pistol is just not a good first introduction, even if it makes sense from a lore perspective. I mean, why would the new inexperienced guy get kitted out with high-tech stuff? Some of these early guns remind me of my first Walmart airsoft gun, a gun that fired each pellet like it was trying out for the lead gun in 1 and 2. Each round would curve directly around the intended target no matter what you did to the thing. I can forgive that level of inaccuracy for full auto, that's somewhat realistic, but even tap firing the earliest AKs is a bit of a nightmare. There were moments where I just didn't know where the fuck my bullets were even going. I understand without the early guns feeling shitty, the power scaling wouldn't be as satisfying, and that power scaling is extremely satisfying once you're an apex predator at the end of the game. But I feel like they could have given us guns that are better than what Cletus slaps together with his $50 Taiwanese 3D printer. My description of the combat makes it sound frustrating, because it can be, especially in the early hours when your kit is bad and your knowledge is low. But it's the kind of frustrating that's generally more fun to overcome, as each attempt is bound to be somewhat different than the last one. Just remember, slow down, always aim for the head, don't get panicked, and spam that health pack button. We already talked a bit about the guns, but that's not the only gear that makes a difference in Shadow of Chernobyl. The other two pieces of kit that will make the biggest difference are the armor and the artifacts. When it comes to armor, the decision is usually pretty simple. Like with the guns, as you continue to play the game, you'll end up with better and better armor pieces. You'll go from leather armor, which does pretty much jack shit, all the way up to an exoskeleton that turns you into the killdozer if Tony Stark made it. Some armors have better protections against certain things, so depending on where you're going or what you're doing, certain suits might be more useful. Going into an irradiated wasteland will be better with a suit that blocks a lot of that, even if it doesn't block as much traditional damage sources. It's an interesting system that really contributes to the feeling of power scaling, with each upgrade having a significant impact. The other main gear is the artifacts. They are one of the main reasons stalkers even enter the zone. They're essentially little rocks that grant the user certain buffs, with most of them also granting some debuffs. For example, the first health artifact you'll likely find is Stone Blood. It's a great artifact because it provides a plus 200 to health, but it also grants -10 to impact, rupture, and bulletproof cap. These can be offset by other artifacts like Spring, which just grants plus 30 to impact without any penalties for equipping it. Finding a good mix of artifacts can take your character from a weakling to a Giga Chad pretty easily, and since these bad boys are all over the damn place, it's not exactly hard to find yourself in a situation where you're pretty kitted out. Pair the gear choices with the gun choices, and it always feels like you have a unique or interesting way to approach every encounter in the game. I can see why fellows replay this game so many times. The decisions seem pretty endless, but I'm not so sure it's good for anyone to stay in the zone for that long. If you ever took a 14-second, lung-obliterating, vision-shaking hit of salvia and wanted a full game based around all gillied up in COD 4, boy do I have the game for you. The zone of Stalker is beautiful, terrifying, mysterious, and dangerous, with many spots modeled around actual locations in and around the real-life Chernobyl disaster area. These environments are an absolute treat to explore and have a feeling all their own that's still worth experiencing now. Graphically, they aren't cutting edge, but I think they still look damn good for the most part. You're rewarded for your exploration. There's something to see around every corner, not to mention smoking dudes can reveal hidden stashes of cargo, which net you some really strong pieces of gear for your trouble. Despite being filled with death, the zone feels alive, with NPCs and enemies all over the place going about their own lives. The levels are also massive, with each level having its own unique feel and atmosphere which still holds up. The zone is a stressful, oppressive, and paranoia-inducing place, which makes the quiet moments around a campfire all the more calming. This place might feel like hell sometimes, but it doesn't have to be that way. My biggest issue with the zone is there's only one way to traverse it, and that's on foot. As much as I love these places, they lose their appeal after the 5th or 6th time running through them. The scary and dangerous become annoying roadblocks as you retread through known territory. I'm not saying the game needed a fast travel system, but the next game has a version of fast travel and I think it's a great addition. I probably would have done more side content if I didn't see the objective marker was 3 maps away from my current location. I love long walks through the irradiated hellscape as much as the next Eastern European, but when it's to do a quest that just gives me money, it's not my time to roleplay as a pyromane for that long. This is where I would talk about the story, but I got one of the bad endings, so this game can go fuck itself. Truth be told, I didn't pay as much attention to the story as I probably should have. It's not like I was out there skipping dialogue or cutscenes. I was simply more interested in the gameplay and the roleplay of being in the zone. I feel like I missed out because a lot of fans really love the stories in these games. To overcompensate for that, I'm currently reading Roadside Picnic, which is a huge influence for the film Stalker, which, believe it or not, influenced this game. I know you guys have been clamoring for book and film reviews on this channel since like 2013, so maybe I'll talk about these if I do a whole series wrap-up video. For this initial playthrough, all I know is that the story must be goated because any game with this as a cutscene should get an Oscar if you ask me. These cutscenes were done by a company called Plastic Wax out of Australia, and they're awesome in the way that they capture the strange world of Stalker. If any of the 36 people who watched this worked on these cutscenes, can you please leak some uncompressed versions of these onto the internet? I have no idea why these videos look like this, but I know they weren't rendered like this. I know you have the clean files somewhere. Show us the clean files. You should leak the clean files now! At the end of the day, Stalker Shadows of Chernobyl is an old and somewhat janky game. It's so old that whatever beloved YouTubers in the headlines for grooming would probably pass on it. I can't believe this guy's a creep. I used to love his videos, man. This thing came out way back in 2007. That makes it 17 years old as of this recording, and in a lot of ways it feels every bit of 17 years old. But I think this game has that it factor to it. There's something special about the way that the different elements of this game come together that is best experienced by playing it. I feel about this game the same way Morrowind boomers feel about Morrowind. From the outside, it just looks like a weird, janky game, but if you give it a chance, there's a real world worth exploring here. I would say give it a try if you haven't already. It's routinely cheaper than whatever MacDawes is calling food these days, and it won't give you intestinal bleeding either. It is not a game for everyone, and if you've spent a few hours and still don't like it, then it might not be worth it for you. But honestly, you won't know until you try it. Who knows, maybe it'll become a new favorite for you. If so, welcome to the Stalker 2 waiting room.
That's right, we're Japanese.